everybody. I am your host for The Agronomist, Lindsay Smith. And I got to tell you, tonight is pretty exciting for a couple reasons. One, it's our 50th show, if you can believe it. Pay no attention to the numbers on the website. We're off by one for a reason. Just trust me, it's the 50th one. And yay, super excited. Also, for the very first time, we have a show sponsor for tonight. So Adama Canada is our show sponsor. So super exciting. Glad to have somebody on board because apparently the bank doesn't take hugs. So really happy to have a company on board that recognizes that we're here. The gathering of some pretty fantastic people, amazing people in chat, top agronomists from across Canada. Just fantastic to have all of you here, and big thanks to Adama Canada for joining us. And I learned today in preparing for the show that I've always said the name wrong. So it is Adama. Okay? Everybody got that? I'm going to do a quick read, and then we're going to say hello because there's so many people in the chat. And I might be stalling just a teeny bit because we're having a tiny technical issue for one of our guests. So just one moment, please. While other sources of innovation run dry, Adama is here to deliver, leveraging the world's largest library of actives to provide innovative crop protection solutions to your greatest challenges. We're all in on you. Talk to your Adama sales rep today or visit adama.com for more information. So huge thank you to Adama for being our show sponsor. All right, so I do want to start quickly before I bring in the guests. I do want to send a little bit of a shout out to, and as Don Flaten, who's about to join us, will say, the weather is just a bit wacky today, and we are something like 35 degrees different, and in Celsius, not Fahrenheit, between Winnipeg, where he is, and Ottawa, where I am, and parts of Southern Ontario. Of course, we've had snow squalls, and we've had rain, and we had here in Ottawa, we had 10 centimeters of snow last night, and then it was up to 6 degrees today and raining. So just a little bit wild, a little bit wacky, but this is the shoulder season, I guess, as we head into the deep winter. Okay, and so I do quickly hello to Peter Johnson. Lara is here as well with Real Agriculture as support in the background. And hi to Warren. Thanks for being here, and thanks, Viren, for on behalf of everyone. Welcome here. It's true. Okay, so my guest tonight, we are talking about soil amendments, soil products, and of course we're going to talk about the oldest of the soil amendments, manure. A personal favorite of mine, let's be honest. So I'll bring in our guest. I think we're having a bit of trouble with Dale Cowan getting his video to work for whatever reason. We had him there for a moment and we've lost him. But Don Flaten, are you there?
Yep, I'm here, and Dale's here too.
Look at this. Okay, so then
Dale's
this ruins this. Yeah, Dale's back. Thank you. So good to see you. But I was going to introduce, when Dale wasn't here, I was going to, of course, introduce Dale as senior agronomist with AGRIS-Co-op, and then Don Flaten, unemployed. But you see, Dale wasn't here. And so, anyway,
I'm back.
So thank you. Yeah, you're back, and we have sound, and I do thank you. Now, of course, Don, Professor Emeritus from the University of Manitoba, and a guy who knows a lot about poop, let's be honest. So we are going to talk about that tonight. And Dale, I'm so glad you could make it. This is fantastic. We are going to talk about a few different soil amendments tonight, some of the research that we have, some of the in-season studies that have happened, some recent, some longer term, and talk about all that. So Dale, I'll start with you now that you are here, and welcome here.
Thank you.
Let's dig in a little bit to, we did have you on the Corn School earlier this summer, or earlier this season, talking about some of the products that you've been evaluating with your work with AGRIS-Co-op. We'll dig quite deep into one of them, but how did the trials go this year on what you were evaluating?
Well, the trials are so far highly variable. We've got some success, and we have some plots where we saw no response to the biological being added. So it's a bit of a puzzle. We're not disappointed one way or the other. This is why you do test plots. You're trying to discover what's going on. So it's giving us some challenges.
For sure. Now, this season, certainly I've heard some calling it, one of the most perfect corn growing seasons they've probably ever had. I mean, the yields are pretty impressive, regardless of where you go. Is it surprising in a great growing year to have variability like that?
Well, I guess the surprising part is I don't know if you can show my slides, but the first two plots we did are where I got the nitrogen response to the Invita product. I wasn't expecting it, and where I wanted it, I didn't get it at all. So that's the puzzle. So when you start looking at fields that are capable of producing 120 bushels of corn with no nitrogen, I didn't expect to see a lot. And other fields where you're only producing 30 bushels of corn with no nitrogen, we didn't see any a benefit to the biological being added. So it was quite surprising from that standpoint.
Okay. Yes, we will. Let's dig into that in just a little bit. Jay does have, thank you to both of you. We have quite a few slides from both of you, which I do love having some visuals to share with our audience, of course. And I have a problem with actually getting to the video clips. So it really does help break up, all that sort of stuff. Now, Don, I did, of course, jokingly say that you're unemployed, but you have recently retired from academics from the University of Manitoba. But walk me through, I mean, how did you first get involved in studying manure's impact on soil? And how many years of research do you have under your belt on this topic? Oh, Don, you might be muted. Hang on. There you go. We're
No,
good. We got this.
it goes all the way back probably to one of the participants that's online, Blaine Fensky, my favorite farmer from Balf, Alberta, back when the old days when he was living in Newdorf and had horses on his farm. But anyways, I've always regarded manure as a very important source of nutrients and also organic matter. And so it's natural to sort of carry that into my academic career and look at the role of manure in improving, especially the soil supply of nutrients. We've done quite a bit of work on that.
Okay. All right. So our first question has come in as we're working now. I think tonight we are going to focus quite a bit on nitrogen and of course phosphorus and potassium in the different trials that we're looking at, those sorts of things. But Paul wants to know, and this is fantastic because we have a Manitoban and we have someone from Ontario. How long does elemental sulfur take to become sulfate? Don, I'll start with you.
That's a really good question, and there's no definite answer. There's been work published from an international study, for example, that looked at elemental S conversion to the plant available form of sulfate sulfur, and they did studies all over the world. And the one place in the world where it didn't convert very quickly and didn't convert in the first year of application was Indian Head, Saskatchewan. So I think in the prairies where we have, and they attributed it to the cold soils. I think maybe pH might have something to do with it as well, but it's extremely variable. And basically you need warm, moist conditions to accelerate the biological process of oxidizing the elemental S to sulfate sulfur. So out here in Western Canada, we would generally be hesitant to rely on a pure elemental sulfur source to supply enough plant available S in the year that it's applied. There's some new products that appear to be maybe able to beat that recommendation, but it's still a little bit sketchy. We still prefer to see in situations where you're really short of sulfur for your crop, a crop like canola, we'd like to see sulfate sulfur put on.
Okay. Now, Dale, that sounds to me then for Ontario should have a slightly better response curve as far as when it's available, if it's warmer and wetter. But what do you advise for clients?
Oh, I very much agree with Don. As if we're needing sulfate sulfur for a spring crop, we put sulfate down. So anything we do with elemental S is fall application in Ontario for us, and we like to split. If we know the total S requirement, say it's 20 pounds, we'll go 10 pounds elemental in the fall and 10 pounds sulfate in the spring. And hopefully, and I'm probably looking at the same data Don has, anywhere from 8 weeks to 8 months for conversion. Depends on a lot of factors, but it is one of the fertilizers. If you want to have a faster conversion, you want to broadcast elemental sulfur, so you have more soil contact, more exposure to bacteria to speed the conversion. So banding elemental S is not something I would recommend.
Yeah, it's the one fertilizer that we say, for goodness sakes, go out there and please broadcast it. Leave it on the surface of the soil to break down. And it's the one fertilizer that we say that way. But also another point to add is it depends on the fineness of the sulfur.
Right.
If you can get a really fine elemental sulfur, it'll break down into sulfate a lot faster. So some of these new suspension products, which have extremely fine particles of sulfur, give lots of surface area for the bacteria to feed on and to convert
Mhm.
faster. So there are some new formulations coming along.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess
Yeah.
some of the forms of sulfur too. If you're talking about ammonium thiosulfate, you have to be careful with that. It's not all sulfate sulfur. It has a colloidal elemental S component to it. It does, that is one that does convert relatively quickly in
Yeah.
the season, but just have to be careful that a pound per pound of sulfate in ammonium thiosulfate liquid versus ammonium sulfate is not a pound for pound comparison. Not at the
Okay. So
start.
yeah, Paul adds he's in Indiana, but he's dealing with subsoil from new development neighborhoods. So I'm assuming he's got some pretty deficient soils that he's dealing with. And I don't know about the weather in Indiana, but I'm going to assume it's nicer than Winnipeg right now, Don, which was minus
Yeah.
what this morning? Minus 22
Minus
was the wind
30,
chill?
minus 33 with the wind chill, which is about
Okay.
in Fahrenheit, about
Fahrenheit.
something
Yeah.
like 30 below Fahrenheit. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. See, look, we can speak
You
all
can keep
sorts.
that out there.
Yeah,
I just wonder if
exactly.
I just wonder if the gentleman's talking about high pH subsoil by chance and asking how
Could
fast
be.
sulfate will acidify a soil. And that's a different question and a whole
Yeah.
different rate of application that sometimes just isn't the most economical thing to do.
No.
Mm.
There was a
You could be
trial in South Dakota on that, and they put on like thousands of pounds of sulfur to try to acidify it. And all they did was, when they acidified it, they introduced so much sulfate that they caused a soil salinity problem. So you trade a soil pH
Oh
problem
no.
for a soil
for somebody.
salinity problem, and you spent a huge amount of money, no net progress. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Paul says yeah, pH in the 8s. So, whoo, that's up there. Okay. All right. That is fascinating. All right. And I didn't even think we talked that much about sulfur tonight. So here we are. This is the show always surprises me. Okay. So always a good thing. Okay. So I do want to send a quick shout out to Canadian Cowman who is a regular listener here. He is in BC's Fraser Valley and was dealing with all sorts of floods, is still, but he says he's here. The water is going down, thankfully. So we're so glad you could make it and glad to hear from you. Glad you're back here and hope everyone out there is doing okay. And love to know how many extra cows you still have in your barn because he did take in quite a few from the flooding. So welcome here and glad to hear things are improving, albeit slowly in BC. Definitely a big issue there, and we'll keep tabs on that for sure. Okay, I want to let's switch gears a little bit. Let's Dale, if we can, let's Jay, can you bring up some of Dale's slides there? Let's go back to that Invita product because of course I want to talk about nitrogen, and then we're going to talk about nitrogen in the context of manure as well. But I mean, we're looking at some incredible, yes, crop prices, but also the cost of synthetic fertilizer is up there, and we're not thinking it's coming down anytime soon. So the fertilizer decisions being made, either already made or being made for next spring, really are coming down to those dollars and cents. And so, of course, there's a couple ways that we can address some of these things, and products are one of them. So Dale, maybe just to catch everyone up, maybe let us know sort of what this trial is, what year you're in, what you're looking at, and then we can sort of dig into some of these findings.
Sure. So this is from 2021. This is this current growing season. And so I had about 10 cooperators agree to put in nitrogen rate trials, different rates of nitrogen with and without Invita. So they're paired treatments. And so this is the first responsive site that was pretty exciting to see. We're seeing the blue bars are with Invita and the buff or brown colored bars are the check. And you can see some pretty substantial yield increases. But what's interesting to me, when you get to about the 129 pound N rate the farmer put on, or the Invita is kicking out some 260 bushels to the acre. And when you go to the 200 pound N rate, Invita is not adding anymore. So when you think in terms of this farmer would normally use somewhere around 200 pounds of N, here's a product that's at 120 pounds of N or so is matching the maximum yield in the field. It doesn't need to put on 200 pounds of N. So this is the exciting thing about what we want to see from biologicals is this. And the optimum N rate, I got to say, is 185 on the check. Sorry, I should have said check behind that. So in his check yield 185, but with Invita it's only around 125, I'll say 129 rate. So this is what you want to see with a biological product. And this farmer, this is a loam soil. He does a split application, some pre-plant, 2 side dress, one early and one just prior to VT. So he's spoon feeding the nitrogen. And so this is what I'm saying. I wouldn't expect to see this kind of response with this kind of N rates split out over the year. Productive loamy soil. You got to admit those yields are pretty stellar for corn, probably 30 bushels higher than normal. So pretty exciting plot to look at. And then if we go to the next slide, this just tempers the enthusiasm because this is a clay farm that is not very or highly responsive to nitrogen. The check yield would have been 100. Well, the optimum N rate is about 170 pounds because we got nothing out of the no response to the Envita that was applied. So this is just about 25 pounds on the starter, balanced side dress one time on clay soil, which is pretty typical in Southwest Ontario. And so we're just not seeing any kind of gain. And unfortunately, for every exciting one, we see one of these. So it just adds to the complexity of understanding biologicals. And on one hand, this is what I expect from biologicals: is they're not going to be 100% all the time. They're going to live in the environment that they're living in because they're biological. So we got a little bit to understand here. In all fairness to Exotics, a manufacturer, they haven't seen any of this data either. So we got some meetings coming up to try to understand what is when's it working, when's it not working.
So and that is, I suppose, that becomes the rub, right? Is can we get to a point where you could with confidence say, here's either the soil type or the soil conditions or the, these criteria that would mean this product is going to return, more than what you put in. But really, by looking at this, we don't necessarily have that clear of an answer.
Yeah, so the first one's very clear. I mean, 50 to 60 pounds less, and you're golden. Where this one, if we told the farmer to cut his nitrogen rate even by 50 pounds, it would have cost him a lot of money. And this is the rub in the whole thing, is the whole idea behind the biological. When you think about emissions and nitrous oxide and stuff, yeah, this is where we want to get to. And so the other side of it is Envita only costs $12 an acre. So right now that's 2 bushels of corn. So farmers are great risk takers. So someone might say, Dale, you're showing me a 50% here. For $12 an acre, I'm going to give it a shot, but I'm going to say yes, but are you going to drop your N rate?
Yes.
And how much, right? So
yes.
Yeah. Because you saw even at 252 pounds in, he was still getting a payback to Envita, but he didn't need to go beyond 120 because he wasn't getting any more yield, right? So this is what you got to watch in the data. It's how you interpret it. So
yes. And now Dr. Dave Hooker has entered the chat. How many reps per field location?
Well, this is the thing. This isn't research. These are demonstrations. So I'm not trying to pass this off as replicated research. So it's 1 per field with and without. We got some farmers did more than 1 field, but no inside reps. So this is the other cautionary thing is, and Dave's quite right. We do demonstration work. We're not a research firm. We're ag retail, trying to help our customers understand products. And so that's what this is about. Part of our My Field program.
Right. Now, but to that end, Dale, I mean, realistically, most farmers have the capability to run similar demonstration plots on their own fields, right? And very much could do similar work as well, right?
Absolutely. And it's with the technology today, it's very easy to do N rate trials on your own. And I think we're going to apart from the price of nitrogen and figuring out where your breakpoints are, is someday as more sustainability programs come to the marketplace, they're measuring the carbon footprint, whether it's sequestration of carbon or nitrous oxide emissions. We're involved with a couple now, and it's easy to measure the nitrogen oxide emissions. So at some point in time, if you're going to participate in those programs, you need to know what's nitrogen response, or what fields do you farm are nitrogen responsive and which ones are not as responsive, and figure out what you're going to do on a nitrogen program.
We could do a whole show just on that question there, Dale, I'll be honest. And maybe we will going forward. And now Joey does ask, and I'm not sure where Joey farms, but with the Envita product, what's the best way to apply? Is it a good idea to mix it with chemical, or should we do a separate application? So in your demonstration trials, what did you do? And is that sort of the way to do it?
Well, we've done it both ways. We put it in a pop-up fertilizer right on the seed at planting, and we also did it foliar. It's a lot easier doing it foliar. Most herbicides like glyphosate are quite compatible as far as we could tell. We've done it both ways. We can't see any difference one way or the other. So that's not a thing. The only trouble with a pop-up fertilizer, if there's any risk to it, you mix it and plant it for the day. You can't get rained out and let Invita sit in a fertilizer tank for 5 days. It's just going to kill the bacteria. So there is
Mhm.
an element to management on a pop-up is you fill for the day and empty at the end of the day. You can't let it sit in a tank.
Much more like inoculant and
Yeah,
than other products, right? So
absolutely.
so okay, so fantastic. All right. Warren Schneckenberger, Farmer Schneck here says Invita and Nutricia. I hope I'm saying that right.
Hmm.
Sounds like a band. Both have identical overall responses here. Sometimes they did something, sometimes they didn't.
Right.
So there we go. This is more work needed. Let's do that
Yeah.
one for now.
So they
Yeah.
are slightly different. Is Invita colonizes every cell in the plant, including roots and stems and aerial parts, where Nutritia does just colonize the outside of the plant. So it
Ah,
is
okay.
does the same things, just works a little
Just
different in the plants. So
okay. One is like a sweater and one are like socks. Is that good?
and
Okay.
yeah, that's
That's
good. And there's a third product called Pivot Bio, but it has to
oh,
be pop up applied on the seed, and it only colonizes the roots. So
okay. So this
yeah.
though, I really feel I mean this is there's only going to be more of these products and more to comb through going forward. I mean, I really do. And Dale, I'm sure you get many of these calls of what you're going to trial and what you're going to demo. And maybe that is my question. As you know, you've only got so much land, you've only got so many hours in a day, you've only got so many summer students. How do you decide what you're going to look into and demonstrate for your clients?
Well, my secret is we're part of the GrowMark system in the U.S. They have a program, a much larger my field, and they vet a lot of these companies. They bring them in, they do interviews with them. They kind of they look at who's done research, who's got valid products. So then they give a little seed money, they do a little extensive testing, and then when it's positive results, they turn it out to the rest of us in the co-op system to do more my field work until we're comfortable and confident. So I do have that resource available to me. But yeah, there is a screening process for me. But you're quite right. There's lots of people. There's literally thousands of these products, and when you look at the big ag chem companies, they're all snapping up and buying up all these small biological companies. I guess I can be a little critical here. Is it takes a lot less money and a lot less regulatory hurdle to bring a biological to market than a new herbicide. So there's certainly a profit stream there in these things. But I will give them credit is one thing between old products and new products is they're isolating the active ingredients, they're concentrating, they're purifying, they know the modes of action, and they can give us a little more assurity. Use this product when you have this abiotic stress, and it should alleviate the stress. So we are getting further down the road at making these things a little more mainstream.
Okay. So John, we're going to switch gears a little. And from the very new, which really isn't new at all. Of course, these are things that have been isolated and identified and those sorts of things. Let's shift gears a little and let's go to the very old, the very tried and true, the very first soil amendment. I was going with the manure, Don, not you. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And let's go. Let's shift gears a little and talk manure, of course. So, um, and of course, near and dear to my heart. But there are, of course, challenges with manure as well. So, Jay, if you don't mind, could you bring up? We'll maybe do the video in between the switching gears in this manure topic, but let's get the intro here of why manure, but also why yes, manure is a nutrient source, so it needs management just like any other.
Well, and especially now when nutrients are expensive, um, because of the high cost of fertilizer, manure's value has gone up too. And so we boil things down to sort of the 4R nutrient stewardship concept applied to manure, putting out the right rate, right source and placement matched up together, and right timing. And we want to consider both the benefits of manure as well as its challenges. And in terms of benefits, which is the next slide, the nutrients that are in manure are varied. It's a complete fertilizer in that respect. Lots of different types of nutrients and macronutrients like NPK and also micronutrients, but also it has organic matter, which is an improvement for soil health, and that's all really really good. But in terms of the challenges, next slide, we do have inconsistent kind of nutrient content in the manure, lots of variability, even in an agitated liquid manure storage, for example, from the beginning of the pump out to the end of the pump out, lots of variability in solid manure as well. Some odor and pathogen issues, and lots of regulations, to try and minimize the environmental impact. So some of the benefits that we might be most most easily attained with manure. If we take a look at the next slide, we had a long-term manure management project where we put on a nitrogen-based rate of manures for 8 years in a long-term study, and we raised the soil test Olsen P levels from 40 parts per million or 35 parts per million all the way up to 180 parts per million with solid pig manure. Just a dramatic increase in soil test P, in fact, with all of our manures, and that would be a blessing in a sense if your soil was really short on phosphorus and you were wanting to improve phosphorus fertility. Manure's fantastic that way. But if you're a livestock producer and you're always putting the manure on that same parcel of land, you're probably jacking up your soil test P way too high, which is an environmental concern, also a waste of a really great source of phosphorus. In the next slide, there's similar results show up for a potassium application. Lots of potassium in manure raises soil test K very high as well. And once again, great if you've got a potassium deficiency on your farm, but if you're concerned about excess K in your forage, this might not be a good thing. Then the next slide shows the benefits of...
Don,
Yep.
if I can interrupt a minute, we could fertilize our soils with your topsoil for potassium.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
true.
I know.
Yeah.
In that previous slide, we're starting off.
Go back one, Jay. Yeah, here we go. Yeah.
We're starting off at
That's right.
700 ppm K,
Yeah.
and we're jacking
Yeah.
it all the way up to 1400. So
We'd be lucky to be at 150 to 200. So
yeah, we're and so this is one of the reasons why we've got to be concerned. Some dairy farmers dairy producers in particular are very concerned about excess K in their forage. You can imagine our soils are so rich in potassium. This is not a good thing to have these excessive levels of K. But if you're farming a sandy soil out there with some of Jason Vogt's customers and on some sandy soils, I mean, this is just wonderful stuff. Anyways, I don't know whether you want to start talking about nitrogen, Lindsay.
Well, let's pause for a moment because I need a drink of water, but also I do want to, of course, send a shout out to our show sponsor tonight, and that's Adama Canada. So thanks so much for coming on board. But I want to go to Jay. I am going to show a clip along this topic and sort of what Dale alluded to, where the Ontario soil situation is somewhat different. And manure applications fitting into the rotation, always a bit of a challenge, but benefits as well. Although I do want to harken back to that very first slide, Dawn, that the last point was don't spread on snow or frozen ground. But anyway, just putting that out there. So Jay, if we could, let's go to the clip with Bern Tobin and Christine Brown herself. And this is a corn school. So we're looking at working manure into the grain rotation and some of the things we have to worry about there. And then Don will come back from this clip and then let's look at that nitrogen question and probably some more on that P and K because we definitely need to. Jay, if you could.
Let's kick this off with a simple question. Why do we typically apply our manure to corn rather than soybeans? Is it simply, it's a legume crop that, soybeans can fix their own nitrogen?
That's a big part of it. The other part of it is that soybeans have a root structure that's a little bit more of a tap root, so they don't respond to the nutrients the same way that corn does. Corn has nutrient needs, especially nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, that far more closely are the same as what manure is providing.
Now, you maintain that applying manure on soybeans is very doable and a solid strategy. There are benefits and challenges. Let's talk about the benefits. Obviously, manure brings both nutrients and organic matter, two things that soybeans can certainly use.
Yeah, definitely. So the challenge with the nutrients is, the first one is you're not making the most economic use of the nitrogen. And so that's from an economic perspective of application and just the logistics of manure. That's a bit of a challenge. But the benefits, especially the potassium, soybeans, they use a lot of potassium for stalk strength. And so when we talk about some of the challenges around manure being that lodging can be a bigger issue, that potassium really does help to benefit the soybean crop. And then the other one is the organic matter. And that organic matter is feeding the microorganisms in the soil. It really depends on what kind of manure you're using and what the composition is. But that organic matter is helping to benefit the soil and ultimately hold more water, provide the nutrient cycling and some of those important factors that all crops need.
Now, what about challenges, Christine? When you get high fertility in high yield environments, that sounds like white mold to me.
Yeah, that's definitely that and lodging, and they really go together. But you never see white mold in a poor soybean crop. It's always in those lush, really well-growing fields. And so where you've got manure, you've got that fertility, you've got hopefully the water holding capacity. And so you've got all the things in place that help have a nice, thick, lush crop. And so those are going to be the areas that are most prone to white mold and to lodging. So that's a big challenge. And then the other challenge is as you add manure more often, as fertility levels increase, which we often see in fields that get regular manure applications, then the risk for some of that nutrient movement, both through runoff and through tile, increases.
For sure. Hey, but you say manure can work on soybeans if you follow some best management practices. Let's talk about a few. First step for you is a manure analysis.
Yeah. Regardless of where manure is going, a manure analysis is really important because it's really hard to know what the right application rate or what the right frequency is if we don't know how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potassium, and even how much sulfur and pH and all those other things that manure contains. And there's such a large variation even within livestock types based on soil tests in the field, based on feed, based on all kinds of factors. So that's the important place to start. For
sure. And you say it's obviously also important to watch the amount of available nitrogen.
Yeah, nitrogen's important, and because soybeans will provide their own nitrogen through the nodulation, soybeans don't need the nitrogen from manure. Having said that, they will utilize that nitrogen, but if we put on too much nitrogen, then it has the tendency to interfere with that nodulation. And so if that nitrogen runs out, generally we don't see that the nodules aren't there, but with too much nitrogen that can happen. And then of course that nitrogen also contributes to lodging.
And you also have to be careful about your soybean variety choice as well, right?
Yeah, there's quite a few varieties that have a difference in height, difference in amount of branching. And so our goal with soybean varieties where manure is going to be applied is to choose one that has good ratings so that they don't lodge and that have a tolerance. There's none that have a resistance, but that have a tolerance to white mold. It's also important to try and get as much airflow through the population. So probably 15-inch rows will give you better air movement than 7-inch rows. And then the other thing is with the soybean varieties, looking at the population range that the seed dealers recommend for a specific area or for a specific soil type, and where manure is going to be applied, generally staying closer to the low end of that population because we do get a little bit more branching, and where there's good fertility, most of the time every seed or most of the seeds will germinate.
And Christine has amazing Wi-Fi in that forest that she's in. Okay, so which I love. Okay, so a few good nuggets there, pardon the pun. A few things did stick out to me, and Dr. Dave Hooker's got a great question here as well. But Dawn, I want to sort of harken back to those slides. And Jay, if you could bring up the one with the pig manure that shows the phosphorus there. So, and Dale, I'd love your input on this. So she says one thing, of course, is having that manure analysis. One back, Jay. Yeah, go back
maybe
one.
two back.
That one. Yeah. Yeah, or even here, but these were, of course, were applied using N as the driver, right, Don? Not phosphorus as the driver.
That's correct. And
Okay,
so we weren't putting on what we regarded as excess amounts of manure for the crop's nitrogen requirements. We were
okay,
using our standard formulas that we use for um, prescribing or recommending manure application rates for the crop's nitrogen requirements. I'll show you a slide though that our formulas didn't work very well for the solid
mm,
manures. We overestimated the amount of nitrogen that came out of the nitrogen in the manure. But
okay.
yeah, this is based on applying once per year to meet the crop's end requirements, 8 consecutive years.
Wow. Okay. Now, and Dale, before we move to the next slides, and actually we want to stay on this one because Dave's question relates to this. But when Ontario farmers are applying, are they using that N as the driver from the manure in deciding rates? Are they using phosphorus as part of it? Or is it, hi, my storage is full, this is where it's going? And I laugh, but it happens. Oh, Dale, you're muted. The two of you really need to
Sorry,
not worry about being muted. It's okay.
I
Yeah,
had background noise coming in email. Sorry.
yeah, that's
Well,
okay.
the answer is yes to all three. So yeah. So normally, if you're regulated farm, you're usually fixing the rates on phosphorus because of the phosphorus index and the nutrient management plan. So usually we're regulating on phosphorus, which means if you're using phytase in the feed additive to enhance the phosphorus uptake in the pig diet, you have a much better ratio of N to P for corn. So then it doesn't matter whether you fix for N or apply for P; they match the ratio of corn needs quite well. If not, then you're
Okay.
going to over fertilize with P if you fixate on the nitrogen. So uh, this is the issue with manure. It's a bundle of nutrients. So which one do you need the
Mhm.
most? If you don't need the
Right.
P, then you want to limit your P application to crop removal. You're going to be short of N top up. And I always recommend to farmers that I would never apply manure to meet more than 70% of my nitrogen needs for one simple reason. It's not a uniform product. Application rates sometimes aren't as uniform as we'd like. So topping up a little bit with 30 or 50 pounds of commercial nitrogen just evens out the weak areas in the field where you miss. So that's been how we generally do things
Hmm.
here.
And good insurance. And okay, so Don, Dr. Dave Hooker's got a question here. He says it's remarkable how long it takes to increase P and K based on these. Would
Yep.
would the increase occur earlier if you were working with lower testing P and K soils to start with?
I don't think it would make so much difference about the soil test background level. What makes a big difference is what we would call the buffering capacity of the soil. If there's lots of clay and organic matter, and the soil has a capacity to store the P and the K in less available forms, then that rise in P and K with excess P and K going on is much slower. And so we've done other experiments in Western Canada across a variety of sites, and like a low organic matter, sandy soil, you can drive P and K up or drive P and K down very quickly with either surpluses of P and K being applied or deficits. But this is a heavy
Okay.
clay soil, 75% clay, heavy clay soil
Wow.
with lots of organic matter, 8% organic matter. This has tremendous
Mhm.
buffering capacity. It takes a while for it to really get jacked up about P or K additions. But
So is
it
this
also
at
holds its fertility.
sorry, is this at Glenlee? Like, is this
Yes,
south of
this is the
Winnipeg in
Glenlee
the Red
Research.
River Valley?
Yes,
Okay,
correct. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
at Glenlee.
right in the heart
Okay,
of the Red
yeah,
River Valley. Yep.
yeah. So that's pretty phenomenal soil, and yes, very high clay. Okay, so let's go forward then in the slides, Jay, if you can,
Yeah, I
because
just want to show this one here
okay, yep,
because
Wow.
it shows the total amount of nitrogen recovered from the manure that was applied. And if we compare it to the amount of nitrogen that we could account for in the synthetic fertilizer, the liquid pig manure was actually pretty system and similar in both the annual cropping system, perennial cropping system. They had statistically similar amounts of the nitrogen that was applied showed up as increased yield in the crop. But we take a look at our solid manures, our solid pig manure and our solid dairy manure, we were getting like 6 to 11% of the nitrogen that was applied over an 8-year period. was actually taken up by the crop to increase crop yield. We assume that 25% in our formulas, 25% of the manure that was applied is available in the year that it's applied. We couldn't even get half that amount over 8 years, let alone 25% over 1 year. So we know that our formulas are way out. We go to the next slide, though. It'll show that once we get the solid manure revved up, and it starts releasing nitrogen, it's a slow release form of nitrogen that can sustain for a long period of time. At the top of the slide, the long-term control going into years 2016, 2017, the 9th and 10 years without any fertilizer or manure, yields down to 15 bushels of wheat and 14 bushels of canola. Continuous synthetic fertilizer, about 60 bushels of both crops in those years. Even where we put on fertilizer for 8 years and then stopped, for those next 2 years,
Wow.
we had
Yeah.
44 and 36 bushels an acre, but you can see the manured fields. Those are the ones that are still kicking out lots of nutrients. Down at the bottom, solid dairy manure yielded 61 bushels of wheat and 59
59.
bushels of canola, virtually the same as the continuous synthetic fertilizer. Those are 2
Oh.
years without any fertilizer or manure applied. Once that manure gets revved up and starts releasing nutrients, it can release a lot of nutrients. And so and especially nitrogen, it's got tremendous capacity to release nitrogen, but it's a slow release.
Interesting. Okay,
So then,
so you're saying though that trying to put a credit to that manure in this
yeah,
situation.
predict
So
it.
on
Yeah.
these fields, if I'm going to put on manure, even if it's year 3 or year 4, if I'm going to give an N credit to that crop, I'm probably grossly overestimating the amount of N I'm getting out of that manure in year 3 or 4, let's say.
At least in our trials. Now, every
Yeah,
manure type is different. Now, this is
right.
manure from a research station where we've got to have lots of bedding for our
Yes, yeah.
pigs and lots of bedding for our dairy cows because of research regulations, working with research animals. But with all that bedding, it's just taking a long time for that
Mm,
bedding and that solid manure to break down, decompose, and release nutrients. And
mhm,
so it just reveals the importance of taking into consideration what's going on your farm with your source of manure, your management system. And that brings us to the last slide, which is soil test, soil test, soil test, and monitor
ta-da!
what is going on. And here's a displaced Manitoban. It's
Yes,
displaced Ontarian.
Ontarian.
This is
Yeah,
John
Amy.
Hurd, a refugee from Ontario, and
Yes.
we look at soil testing from 3 sort of perspectives to predict the requirements for next year's crop, but also evaluating your nutrient management planning for last year's crop. If you gave a big nitrogen credit for your solid manure and it didn't come, then it would show up as a really low soil test, and that might look weird
Mm,
to you, and you decide you're going to manage your manure a little bit different. But it also, if you see after 10 years of applying manure, you're getting way more nitrogen credit than you
mm,
expected, and your soil test levels start to build up, I think it's really helpful. And then monitor for long-term trends. And so we think that even in areas where they don't normally fall soil test, like Eastern Canada or Southern Ontario, we think it's a good idea to go out post-harvest and look at those soil test levels, see how close you made it to
mhm.
your target of leftover nitrogen. If you've got a whole bunch of leftover nitrogen that's just going to leach away in the wintertime, you know that you've underestimated the amount of nitrogen that's coming from the soil and that you could be cutting back.
Wow. Okay. So fascinating stuff. Now we have a couple really great questions and comments. Jason Vogt does want to remind everyone that not everyone has that amazing Red River soil. And so so west of Elm Creek, soil test K can be as low as 55 parts per million to about 120. So not everyone is living in the Garden of Eden with those amazing soil test levels. Just a reminder, everybody. Yeah. I mean, Elm
Yeah,
Creek is nice, right? I mean, who doesn't wanna
it's
go out
right
that
on
way?
the dividing
Okay.
line.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Okay. So now, Peter Johnson is in the chat. Some of you may know him. And he would like to know if, Don, do you know the carbon to nitrogen ratio of those manures or even a range?
No, I don't know those. And to be honest, I don't know whether there's a really good methodology to
Mm.
establish exactly what those are, because most of the time when we're going to measure carbon and nitrogen, we're going to dry the soil sample, homogenize it, and grind it, and that's going to drive off a whole bunch of nitrogen. So I don't know what the C to N ratio is and that stuff, but my guess it's just a guess. I'm saying it's probably 20 to 1 or higher.
Okay. It's too high. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Now, so Dale, I mean, we've talked about obviously that manure is in fact, of course, not homogeneous, as you said. It's not necessarily the same product you're putting from one into the other. From the, you know, that it does have this sort of curveball that it can throw you because you don't know necessarily. So we need to test our manure, but we, of course, as Dawn points out, need to test the soil. So is for your clients that have manure in rotation often, do you soil test more often because of that or less often?
Well, I think we try to soil sample at least every 4 years just for the 4R compliance of our accreditation program. So I don't know that manure would cause us. Now, we're not testing for nitrogen in the soil as a rule.
Right.
You know, when you get 400 millimeters of rainfall, no mystery where the
Wow.
nitrogen's going to be. So it's a little different than the dry lands of west of where we are. So yeah, no, we soil test the P and K and the microbes and stuff. We test that. Try to be on a 4-year program. Some guys more frequent. So as Don alluded to, things don't change dramatically overnight. So over a 4-year period, you can start to look at some trends, and so we don't see the need to go any more frequently. Some guys do on the sandy ground for high value crops, but as a rule, every 4 years. Now, I wish more farmers would soil sample. We're getting better. We're sneaking up on it. I would say that probably 40% of the farmers are soil sampling on a regular basis, and we need to get more doing it. But also, as an industry, as an agronomist, not myself personally, but I have done in the past, is we have to stop being comfortable with making a fertilizer recommendation without a soil report.
Mm.
Right? It's not
Well
just the
done.
farmers. It's not just the farmers that are doing it. It's as an industry, we are too. So we just need to get more soil sampling done. Won't disagree with Don's statement whatsoever. We just need to, and the time is coming when society is saying that that little extra bit of fertilizer you put on just in case, we want you to stop doing that. And so that means being more knowledgeable, more precise, and doing more testing.
All right. I like it. I will say I'm pretty sure every single agronomist or researcher or extension person who has been a guest on the show, the one thing they all will recommend is soil testing or more soil testing. So there we go. That's our plug for that as well. Some really good questions and comments have come in. John has joined after he's been on hiatus for a couple weeks. So here's what you missed, John. It is our 50th episode. We have a sponsor now, and that's Adama Canada. So thank you. So you've missed a lot, actually. But usually John is on before anyone else and welcomes everyone and takes away my job. So John, welcome back. Sorry to have interrupted your nap, but thank you for being here now. And that is a good reminder, though, that of course you can find this show on realagriculture.com/agronomist. So if you miss any episodes, you can always go there. And that is how you get your CEU credits as well. So tomorrow, this episode will be on the site. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, you know that you can hit the playlist. You can see as many as you would like, all 50 after tonight, if you really want to go and stare at my mug for a while. Anyway, but also the brilliant guest that we have really is really why we do this. Now, 2 good questions. So Janet wants to know, would composted manure accelerate the rate of absorption? So how does composted manure play into the N availability?
As far as we know, composted manure is even more stable form of nitrogen than in the fresh manure. It's had time to lose some nitrogen, to be honest. Some of the ammonia is already gassed off, and then it's stabilized with that microbial action. And so what I would look at composted manure as an enriched source of P and K,
Right.
but as a relatively inefficient source of nitrogen for the upcoming crop. It'll
Okay.
provide some nitrogen over the long term, but I would view compost as a much more broad purpose amendment to
Hmm.
improve soil structure and tilth and organic matter content and P and K. We haven't talked much about sulfur. One of the things that's important to remember about sulfur, the sulfur forms in manure are not generally plant available. So we've actually been
Okay.
able to get, not us personally, but the University of Saskatchewan, Jeff Shano has got some spectacular yield increases from applying sulfur fertilizer to manured treatments because the manure's form of sulfur
Mm,
is not in that sulfate form we were talking about earlier.
okay.
Well, and the other thing too, the way we found our sulfur deficiency in Ontario is put on more N than you need. You'll soon find your sulfur deficiency.
Yeah, yeah.
There you go. That's one way to find it. All right, now, Dale, John, of course, says excellent statement on the recommendations for little soil testing. I'm surprised I haven't heard it before. It's like a doctor recommending a medication for cholesterol without a blood test. I like that. I think
True
that's
enough.
bang
Yep.
on. So John,
Yep.
he's coming out swinging. I like it. Okay. Now, Lara has one question, and then I'll probably wrap up with Peter's. Don, what about using acid digestion to determine the N content in manure and then combustion analysis of organic N and C to get a ratio? I
Yeah, and
think
that's
Lara's
that's
trying
some of the stuff.
to get a job.
No, that's a good suggestion. I think.
She's volunteering.
And the trouble is that you have to homogenize the sample first. Like we were thinking about, if you take that sample and you dry it and then you grind it and then you can separate it into two uniform samples to go into two different methods of analysis and stuff like that. Well, by the time you dry the sample, it's dramatically altered. And so what
Hmm.
what I need is a gigantic analyzer that I can dump like a 20-liter pail of solid manure into and have it all
Yeah.
analyzed, and that takes bucket chemistry to a whole new level. But
Yes.
It
it's
does.
it's it's just something that we were never able to figure out. And I know lots of people will give you C to N ratios for manures, but to be honest, I'm not sure that I'm really confident in it, considering the variability of the product and
Yeah.
the proneness of the ammonia to volatilizing and being
Yeah.
lost. But anyways, yeah,
To
it's
Yeah.
disappear.
and yeah,
Yeah.
anyways, but the
Yeah.
bottom line is that the solid manures are pretty slow in giving up their nitrogen,
Hmm.
and they're very stable forms of nitrogen, but they're very good for raising, P and K fertility.
Yeah.
Okay.
From a practical sense, I look at the more manure tests you do, you're going to come up with a grand average and a coefficient variation or a standard deviation that you're going to be working between two variables. Do the best you
Yep.
can. And I made a statement about manure, being non-uniform. I got to give credit to the equipment manufacturers. We're doing a whole lot better job of spreading manure in the last decade than we ever have previously. So the
Yep.
spreader equipment, the agitators, the tanks, the applicators, we got meters
Hmm.
knowing exactly how many gallons per acre are going on at any one time. We even got them running prescription maps on manure applicators. So we have
Yeah,
come
yeah,
a long way in managing organic amendments on our farm. So I want to give a shout out to the people that are making those
Yeah.
efforts. So
no, and the new
Absolutely.
technology for liquid manures to give nutrient analysis on the go and
right,
have variable rates of application depending
Yeah.
on what portion of the tank you're pumping out or how much rain there was this summer compared to last summer. That those
right.
new technologies are fantastic.
But still, we need to get Dawn a bucket test. Also,
Yes.
to Peter and Lara, I was not suggesting Lara needed to or wanted to go get another job. I meant she was just looking for more work to do while still also working for real agriculture. Because sometimes I think she misses the lab. I'm just putting it out there. Okay, so last question, Dale. This is from Peter Johnson. Could you discuss your thoughts on the difference between cattle manure and other manure types? Now, I'm guessing he means dairy, not like a pack barn, but I'm not sure. Other manure types and consistency of response. So in that research, I'm guessing he's talking dairy. So cattle versus hog, because I'm pretty sure you
Well,
didn't look at sheep manure.
yeah. Well, I've been doing this a long time, so I've had a lot of field experience working stuff over the last 35 years. And so my experience with cattle manure, whether it's dry pack, even liquid to a certain extent. It's not a highly concentrated nitrogen source, anyways. And of the ammonia that's in it, it's lost very quickly because of high urease activity because of the diet. So I would say that the minute you start spreading beef manure, you're starting to lose ammonia. Incorporating within 4 hours may not even be fast enough to capture what ammonia is there. So part of the response, I've never had a lot of success taking an N credit on dry cattle manure.
Yeah.
But in contrast, chicken manure is almost the same thing as fertilizer.
Yeah.
Uric acid is very stable. They can lay on the surface for 4 or 5 days, and you can pretty much have minimal N loss. It'll smell, of course, but so there's different manure types, different ways to handle it. But that's been my experience. I think that's what Peter was alluding to, is that, and I guess that's another point too. I really love your work on that 8-year thing. Is we're going to have some farmers, because of the price of nitrogen, want to start doing some manure transfer and want to take that N credit off that manure report. And I would just caution them that I don't necessarily think that the N calculation would be something I would put my hat on as being a definite nitrogen credit in my first year of a manure application. I think we need to temper that just a bit.
Yeah, and I need to qualify my slagging of solid manure being a slow nitrogen release, because I forgot about poultry manure. And poultry manure has this special behavior of manure fairies that come along and take poultry manure and fly away. Because, like, honestly, poultry manure does not accumulate on farms because grain farmers are so eager to get it. It does have such a high value in terms of its fertilizer equivalent. So not all solid manures are the same, and poultry manure is especially available. And just remember, poultry manure has manure fairies. So.
Yeah, okay. So that is the very scientific aspect of tonight, are the manure fairies. But I feel like we do need to start ranking manure, and so poultry's way up there, and then we work our way down. So I'm going to guess like llama and alpaca is way at the bottom because they're terrible animals. Anyway, so that's how I'm going to rank them. Anyway, but that's just me. Okay, and Pete does point out, and I did want to say this, of course, is that we're right, as you mentioned, Dale, maybe with trying to, add manure to take away some of that fertility or that fertilizer bill, there are lots of other benefits to including manure as a nutrient source. It's just a caution to not necessarily depend on it for the crop's nitrogen needs that year after.
Well, it's not just manure. We have lots of other organic amendments, compost or biosolids, whatever you want to use. And people fixate, I want to build my organic matter, and totally ignore that they're putting on 300 pounds of phosphorus when they're trying to put on 4 tons of dry material for organic matter building. So it's a bundle of nutrients. So look at it in its entirety to understand what it is that you're doing on your soil. What's the nutrient in most need? And you can't pretend the P and K aren't there and just fixate on the organic matter. You're going to run into a bunch of other environmental issues in a hurry. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This we are out of time, maybe even overtime a little. Well, we started a little late. Peter is slagging sheep, and so I'm just not even going to talk about them anymore. Anyway, llamas and alpacas are way worse than sheep. Don't even start with me, Peter. Okay, so but this has been fantastic, and I think really plenty of things to think about. Absolutely, as the winter plans go on, planning for spring, I think manure is going to be a hot commodity in the spring, but of course, lots to consider, and I think we've given agronomists and farmers alike plenty of things to consider. So Dale and Dawn, thank you so much. As I mentioned, of course, tonight's 50th episode of The Agronomist was brought to you by Adama Canada. You can, of course, qualify for CU credits by heading over to realagriculture.com/agronomist tomorrow. And yes, so thank you to Dale and to Dawn for your time, for your expertise, and for being willing to take all these questions as they come in. I really appreciate it.
It was very enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was very good. And thanks, Dale. It was really nice to share the evening with you. And Lindsay.
Well, thanks.
10 years since I've seen you. We were together in Guelph one time, many years ago.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. See? Oh my goodness. This This is we'll sign off and then we can chat in the green room anyway. Okay, thank you everyone. Great questions. Thank you to everyone who joined in tonight. We will see you next week on The Agronomist, 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights. Cheers, everybody.